All right, good morning, Doug. We're here with a viewer Q&A. Just a reminder to people, if you want to ask Doug questions for these Q&As, the best way to do it is to join our Telegram group. There's a description and a link below. I solicit questions from that group, and then we get through as many of them as we can. So Doug, first of all, someone says you wrote Crisis Investing in the early 70s, it says. It wasn't the early 70s, but and you were several decades ahead of the crisis. What caused you to think the crash was imminent then, and what do you think about that prediction looking back?
Hmm. Well, look, the genesis of that book, and in fact, so much, was Harry Brown's book, You Can Profit from the Coming Devaluation, or was it How to Profit from the Coming? Doesn't matter. That was the book that Harry wrote in about 1970, and I read it in early 71. And after I'd already been thinking enough and reading enough about economics, that book is a work of genius. It really is. It was perfect for the time, very well written, very well thought out, like everything Harry did. Anyway, sometime after that, I said to myself, you know what? I could write that book. And of course, it turned out that I did write that book when I wrote Crisis Investing in 1978, and it was published in 1979 and became a big bestseller in 80 and 81. Perversely, after the crisis was pretty much over. That's the way it works. People don't buy books that are outlandish.
Ahead of their time.
No, no. In fact, they buy them after the time when
Yes.
it's like the markets in general. But look, all I was trying to do, I don't know if I'm answering this question properly or not. It's that all I was trying to do in that book was take basic economic theory and apply it to the current situation and say, where is this likely to end? Well, it didn't end with the collapse of Western civilization, which is always a possibility. In fact, it's looking like much more of a possibility now than it was then. But things got really ugly and very nearly went over the edge back then. And now here we are, after they've pulled out all the stops 40 years later. And I think we're back in the same situation, but greatly amplified. So, it's just looking at economic theory and seeing how it applies. And that's really all it is or was.
Yeah, I always think of when I started reading your work, which wasn't until the very early 2000s, so I'm way behind the curve on this. But you make a lot of predictions over your career. But for me, what have got out of all of your work is it helped me think properly, helped me understand, what the dynamics were, like how economics actually work and how it affects the real world and the financial markets. And the predictions are, they're interesting because they get people's attention, but teaching people or trying to show people how to think well so they can make good decisions for themselves is, I think what you've always been really good at.
Yeah, and I really think that's more important. And as far as making predictions is concerned, it's been said that if you're going to predict often, because the way it works is that, naturally, you draw attention to things you were right on and kind of
Right, exactly.
weren't right. But, there's an infinite number of variables in the world that can change anything, even a prediction which should have been right. So, yeah.
Right. This complex systems are, it's not, well, they're complex and there are variables black swan variables, all kinds of things that can happen. But Doug, could you just move your computer camera down a little bit because we only see just your head in the frame. There we go.
Of course.
Perfect. Okay, so this question I don't know if you'll have an answer to, but I might be able to help this person. They say in a recent video with Joel Salatin, he touched on private membership associations, and they want to know if you've dealt with or know people who've dealt with these membership associations. He also asked about private foundations, which is actually something different. And just wants to know if you know anything about them or know how they're used.
Regarding the legal structures of these things, the answer is no.
Okay.
And I think I'm the wrong person to ask. But
Okay, there's one guy I know who he does stuff on this area. I think his name is Jason Leister's. His website, I believe, is sovereignbusiness.org, and he does talk about these private member associations, and it makes it so that you can turn a business into kind of like a country club where you can essentially provide services as part of that membership, and then you sidestep a lot of the regulatory framework that would normally regulate that area. And that's what Joel Saladin, I think, was talking about. So you go to sovereignbusiness.org, and Jason, he has a free e-letter. You can sign up for that.
good. That makes a lot of sense because it's helping to build a parallel economy. So
Exactly.
good.
Yeah. Okay. Someone says they've enjoyed watching the channel from the very beginning. Really appreciate your ideas, and they says it's profoundly changed his worldview. So this young man is in his last year of aeronautical engineering at a university in the UK, and they're considering what to do next. He says they'd like to start a company in a few years' time, but for now, they feel they need to get more experience by working. He says, I can go into engineering/technology, but this segment seems quite stagnant, or finance where I already have some experience. Basically just wonders what advice you might have for someone in his situation based upon the little information we have.
Huh. Well, I've known two famous aeronautical engineers. One is Paul McCready, who developed the Gossamer Condor and the Sun Racer and the thing that they pedaled across the English Canal. I don't know what he called that one.
English Channel, yeah.
Yeah, so I was rather friendly with Paul. We spent some time together. He was an aeronautical guy, basically. And the other guy is Burt Rutan, who I guess he became famous because he designed the plane that his brother flew around the world nonstop. First time that happened, and he's in this venture with Richard Branson now. Okay, well, Paul's dead, but I guess I could call Burt and he'd return the call. So I know a couple of guys that have done well in aeronautical engineering, but they were both really, really innovators, and both ran their own companies. So don't know how to answer the question.
Well, it seems like if you could find what if I were in this guy's situation and just trying to get my career going, I would really try and go and apprentice myself to one of these great innovators that's out there, and just be like, just hopefully demonstrate to them that I have my talents and hustle and all of that can add value to what they're doing, and then learn along the way. So that's what I would do, because there's this period in your 20s especially where you don't need a lot and you have tons of energy, and believe it or not, people who are successful and have achieved a lot really want to help you. Typically they really do. They're always looking for somebody who stands out, and if you can demonstrate yourself, doors will open for you can't even imagine.
Absolutely correct, because there's something to be said for the way things used to work in the Middle Ages, where first you were an apprentice and then you became a journeyman, where you'd travel around and work for different masters, and then you'd become a master yourself. And that's a very logical and reasonable progression. So sounds like you're about to advance into the journeyman stage. And I know in my business, in fact, every business that I can think of, everybody who's doing well in a business is looking for somebody who's smarter than they are that can replace them and take things to the next level. You don't want a bunch of peons under you. I mean,
100% of the time. Yep.
So I think that's your answer. It's reach out to lots of guys in the area of the business that you're interested in, and they'll give you an appointment, see if you get along.
Yeah, and you got to go into it not with what you want. You got to go into it with how you can create value for them. If you can do that, you'll get everything you want and more. You'll get things that you can't even imagine that you wanted will end up coming your way over time. You just have to. A lot of people today are unwilling to sort of apprentice themselves to someone, and I think that if you can find a situation where you can do that, boy, there's no other way to like save 20 years on a career. If you can find that, it's amazing.
Exactly. God, I just wish I'd found a mentor, as it were, earlier in my life, so I wouldn't have had to reinvent reinvent the wheel half a dozen times. Could have saved
Yeah,
myself a long time of trouble.
no doubt. Okay. Someone asks, they'd really like to hear your thoughts on morals versus ethics and freedom versus liberty. Says these two sets of words are so similar that they're not even sure what the difference is. Are ethics better than morals? What's really the difference between them?
Oh, that's an absolutely excellent question. Uh, as far as ethics and morals are concerned, I can give you what I've thought out on this, see if you agree with it. Morals are precepts that are generally accepted by society. Uh, they're kind of like rules that you're expected to follow. Ethics, however, are things that guide you internally. And let's say the distinction might be a moral. Uh, well, look, when you think about issues of morals and ethics anyway, I think it's important to bear in mind that there's two ways of reacting to these things. One is you can be guided by, in effect, a radar system. You're flying along through life, and the radar system tells you what's around you, and you react regarding to what's around you. Okay. The other is a gyroscopically. This is getting back to the. It's funny. The previous question was about aeronautical
Yeah,
engineering.
exactly.
Yeah. And the other one is gyroscopic, which is kind of doesn't pay attention to outside influences. It's just directed internally. And that's, I think, part of the distinction between, oh, Matt, are you still there?
Yeah, yeah, I'm still here. I'm just, my camera died. I'll change it. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, you know,
So,
it,
so
it, it can be important to, well, yeah, it's important to observe the moral environment that you're living in. But the moral environment you're living in a society like Soviet Russia, or let's say Rwanda during the 80s, is going to be very different than what would be laid out by your own personal ethics. So you think I'm being clear there, Matt, or not?
yeah, I think so. So basically, it's that there are standards of the society, maybe of the culture, and then there's your own standards, like your own sense of what's right and wrong, and not being that cannot be persuaded maybe by the crowd. Like someone with a strong ethical framework is not going to fall victim to peer pressure, for instance.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
yeah,
Or
yeah, exactly. I'd say morality might be something that your parents or school or church teaches you. Ethics are something that you abide by yourself.
right,
And
and there
there's no
can be overlap.
huge overlap. I mean, ideally, they're the same thing, but
It should
in
be. Yeah.
practice, they're not. And the difference between freedom and liberty, well, I don't know how we'd parse those words, but they boil down to the same, pretty much the same thing. With
Well, somebody did say something to me. I made a comment talking about in Spanish, there really isn't a word for freedom, and all they have is libertad. And his argument was that the word doesn't mean the same thing. And
hmm,
I don't know enough about that actually. I didn't know enough about it to even comment on it.
yeah, freedom. Well, is one better applied to a society, and the other is best applied to your personal attitude? I don't know because using these words. In many ways, they're interchangeable. While they shouldn't be as interchangeable as they are. And is there a third word that works well?
Hmm.
Hmm. None comes to mind.
Well, being sovereign is a way of like that word is different, right? Doesn't that have a different connotation?
It does, but the sovereign is the ruler, and
Yeah.
so it's got certain connotations which are I find distasteful. Although I
Hmm.
understand, yes, that's true.
Hmm. Okay.
It's strange. They say there are a million, actually a million. That's actually the number words in the English language, which is twice as many as whatever language comes second. And it's not Spanish for sure. But it's strange that we only have 2 words for concepts as important as these: liberty or freedom.
Yeah.
Very strange. And they say the Eskimos have 50 different words for types of snow.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting. Okay, someone asks, well, another person actually said that I should tell viewers, the same guy said I should tell the viewers that we are on other things other than just YouTube. So we are on, just in case our account gets shut down for some reason. So we are on, well, Jeff Berwick puts us on his dollarvigilante.tv, and we're also on Odyssey, which is a kind of a decentralized video platform. So it's can't really be censored. So just make you aware we are on those. We also do actually put these up on the different podcast networks, just audio only, although they're usually like 4 days or 5 days delayed after the video's up. So just letting people know. Okay. So someone says, thanks for everything you do. Love listening and the considerations you guys bring to the table. My question is, he says, if there is a population reduction in the works, putting it as politely as possible, obviously there would be many other more serious issues. In your guys' opinion, what does that look like as far as wealth management goes? Like if there were significant population reduction in the world, how does that affect investing is what it sounds like the question is.
Well, serious population reductions in world history. Well, the most serious one since ancient times was the Black Plague, which was launched upon Europe in like 1330 or thereabouts. And they say it wiped out in between 30 and 50% of everybody on the continent during its first wave.
Yeah.
So.
And it changed everything, didn't it? I mean,
it did. I mean, labor, it helped destroy the feudal system because labor became very valuable and upset the society, meant that serfs could run away and there was nobody around to catch them. And, it helped to start the peasant revolt in England, and 50 years later, although it's true. Yeah, so, and could it happen? Well, World War I was mass slaughter, but basically just between soldiers, basically. And then World War II was much bigger mass slaughter, responsible for, 60 million people, but who knows? And that was civilian populations. And World War III, which I expect we're going to have some form of, is likely to be bigger, not just because there are a lot more people around, but the technology lends itself to mass murder, mainly biological warfare and cyber warfare, much more effective than, driving out with your tank and blowing up another tank. I mean, that's pretty inefficient when it comes to killing people, or even dropping bombs. So, yeah, I think that something like that is logical and possible, probably inevitable.
Well, and even if it's not an event like that, like a war, I mean, all the advanced societies on Earth are in population decline at this point. I mean, there's substantial. I mean, everybody's worried about overpopulation, but if you look at the predictions of the demographics at this point, they look pretty rough. Like China collapsing. I mean, you see the same thing in Japan, Western Europe. It's happening. If it weren't for the importation of the people from the Middle East and from Africa, it would look really, really awful there too. So yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, it's absolutely going to happen. And I don't see why it should turn around, because as people become urbanized, there's less reason from an economic point of view to have children. Children are an asset on the farm for many, many reasons, including they're your retirement program. You live in a city, in an industrial society, children are an expense. They're a liability, all kinds of things. So yeah, population is likely to drop.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
What do we
I
do
think,
about it?
what's
How do
that?
we how, what do we do about it? How do we capitalize on it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends upon what it ends up looking like, because if it ends up looking like where you have, like an organic population collapse, then, all the invention around robotics and stuff like that becomes something really important. We see that a lot of that effort in Japan, for instance, because of the olding or the aging population, and there are no young people. So that becomes one way to sort of play it from a financial perspective, I guess, is around robotics and things like that. But I don't know. I mean, if population isn't expanding, then GDP, it's very difficult for GDP to grow, and it's very difficult for the economy not to go into deep recession or depression. I mean, if you're not constantly adding new bodies to it. And I think I think a lot of there is the idea that maybe Western nations are trying to destroy their civilizations by importing all these refugees and so forth. But and there could be some reason to that too. They're trying to change the culture, but there's also, from an economic standpoint, with population collapse, the economy starts to really turn down, and it could be done. A lot of the motivation behind it could simply be for those economic reasons, honestly. And I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's worth it. I'm just saying that's a reasonable, I think, hypothesis for why they do it.
Yeah, and as the standard of living gets higher because of increases in technology, improvements in technology, and additions to the capital base, because people do tend, we're just genetically programmed like squirrels to produce more than we consume. It's actually aberrational when somebody consumes more than they produce. But I guess the point that I'm trying to make here is that back in the primitive days when we had to work 12 or 15 hours a day just to stay alive, or even early industrial days when you had to load 16 tons of coal to be able to buy a little bit of food from the company store, you didn't have time to think about cosmic problems. But now everybody's got time to think about the meaning of life. And when you spend too much time thinking about the meaning of life, you tend not to reproduce a large family and
Yeah.
and go into that. You become more, if you will, self-centered, even narcissistic, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. But I do see a trend among people my age and younger where there's a recognition that even if it's not for economic reasons to have children, I mean, it's for, I don't know, this might not be the right word. It's almost for aesthetic reasons. Like, it's for reasons of like creation itself, for like to make something in the world is why is a bigger drive for people I know today to have children. And I think I agree with that. I know we have a differing opinion on this a little bit, but I definitely agree with that. And I think it's good.
Well, listen, you've had very good luck with your kids. They're,
So far, so good.
well, they'll be out of their teenage years, so we'll be
Yeah.
able to say that more definitively soon. But frankly, it's a genetic lottery. When you mate with some female or male and see what comes up, and then you got to, it's a gamble. And that's why when it comes to kids, as you know, I've always said, look, I don't have any kids to my knowledge anyway. And if I wanted kids, I'd adopt them. This is what the Romans did. They didn't adopt babies either. They adopted people that were already teenagers so they could make a judgment as to what kind of a person they were getting. I
Yeah.
mean, so if you want kids, seems to me that's a better way to do it. You say, well, what about your genetic legacy? And I say, to hell with my genes. They're not my friends. My genes treat me as a survival machine. That's all I am to them. So to
Yeah.
hell with my genes.
Yep. I understand that. And I think that's a it's a way to lower the risk of with heirs and children and all that. I understand that, but like I said, if you think about it as an aesthetic, like the reason if for people who I started businesses because I was interested irrationally in the ideas that were theoretically solved by that business. I'm not an artist, but it's the closest version of art that I have in my life is create those things. So, and I feel like in a way with the kids, it's the same thing. And I realize, and I've always joked since the very beginning, since my first child was born, it's like people said, well, are you going to have more? And I'm like, yeah, I think you should have as many as possible because, they're not all going to work out the way you hope. I mean, you need more shots on goal, I think, to try just to produce good children.
That makes sense. I mean, I buy that argument because if I reproduced and had a bunch of kids, if one or more or all of them didn't meet with my approval, I would fulfill my basic duties as a parent and then disown them. Bye-bye.
Exactly. Right.
Anyway, I don't know if we're solving anything with answering these questions.
Well, it's fun to talk about, though. I'm enjoying myself, so who cares? Let's see. Somebody asked if we would consider having somebody like Marion Katuza or Justin Cochran on the podcast, or somebody else who can help explain the carbon markets. Even I know EB has a new deal in that space he's doing, and it might be worthwhile having someone come on and just explain it and help us understand it.
Yeah, the problem might be that it turns out that carbon-related companies are blossoming now in Vancouver, especially, like poison mushrooms after a rainstorm. And the same thing happened. The same thing always happens. Same thing happened in 2000 with uranium companies. There used to be like 5 publicly traded uranium companies anywhere. And when uranium started moving, there were 500, and that's a correct number, incidentally, 500. Most of them were just total crap. And now, 98% of them have gone bankrupt. Same thing will happen in this carbon thing. Because at least uranium was based on reality. It's
right, exactly.
But this carbon thing is a total, it's a ridiculous abstraction.
Yeah.
So it's been, but chances are, unless the stock market collapses totally, which it might, that this could be a profitable little bubble. But these things are not heirlooms. None of them are.
Right. It's kind of like for people who own crypto, it's like the ICO craze in 2016. Everybody was doing these initial coin offerings, and there was tons of speculation, and most of them, a lot of them were scams. And then you could argue the same thing with NFTs at this point as well, right? So,
yeah,
markets get out of control.
Yeah. Anyway, perhaps we can find somebody that can present the case for it. Okay. EB might be the guy because Marin's raising like a $50 or $100 million for his own deal right now. So he looks at these things from one point of view only at this point, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Okay. Doug, based on your experience, is it easier to catch a market top or a market bottom?
That's an excellent question too. There's an old saying, and I love old sayings because they sum up wisdom. You can't tell how high a tree is going to grow. Well, actually you can. There are physical limits, but you get the idea. So, I can't believe anything in today's market as far as size and prices and so forth. So it's a matter of clocking the public psychology. In fact, better than any investment newsletter is simply going down to the local drugstore and looking at the magazines. Yes, I know the drugstore does hardly exist and the magazine rack doesn't exist. And I know, but if you can find a modern equivalent of that, and just look at what's on the front covers to see what's popular and what everybody's buying. And when everybody's bought something, all they can do is sell it. So that's picking market tops. Yeah, that's one thing, but it's dangerous. These bubbles can double and double again. And look what's happened in recent years. And the same thing for market bottoms. I mean, look what happened with oil a few years ago, where you'd think that it would be metaphysically impossible for a valuable commodity, useful commodity like oil, to be worth nothing. But it was selling on the futures exchanges for minus $30 a barrel.
It was amazing.
I mean, you tell people that didn't see it happen, they think that you're making that up, but it's true. Mm-hmm. And the same thing has happened in the past with the hog market, where hogs sold for minus dollars. Now, how could that happen? Well, it wasn't because pork and oil weren't valuable. It was because there was no place to store all that was being produced. So you had to get rid of it. But so these things happen. So ultra high, ultra low, these markets can do all these crazy things. That's why as time has gone on and I become more aware of these things and have them happen right before my very eyes, I've actually become more conservative as a speculator. Mm-hmm. So, but it's just a question of looking around and feeling things and not joining the crowd. Although joining the crowd during a major trend, yeah, that's great. Go with the flow, go with the flow. Don't try to swim upstream when water's going downstream. I mean, it's not very energy efficient. But there are certain times.
Well, I had this example during the whole GameStop thing that happened, last year. My teenage nephew texted me asking me what I thought about GameStop. And I mean, he's never asked me about a stock ever before. And so I was going, well, I think you should sell. I think you should sell.
The very fact you're asking about it is the bell ringing at the top of the market. Listen, one thing I used to love about playing polo is I'd often go to these polo parties where a bunch of rich guys would be talking about what they were doing in the markets and all that. And, you could tell when everybody's talking about one thing, it's the bell ringing probably. Yeah. Because what do polo players know about high tech or whatever? Well, the answer is nothing. They're talking about horses. Well, yeah, I'll pay attention. So it's a question of psychology. The market's a question of psychology, not reality. And I guess GameStop is a perfect example. I mean, it was massively short because the hedge funds looked at it and said, this is a business that's going to zero. I guess they were quite correct from the fundamental point of view. But when everybody's short, gee, that's even if it's going to zero.
You set yourself up for a big time short squeeze, and that's what happened.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know what I'd do with GameStop right now because the management may be pretty stupid in some ways, but they apparently raised a lot of money when the stock was jammed up to artificial mint. So people could buy it, and so they have a lot of cash now.
Yeah, I haven't been following it, honestly. I have no idea if that's... I think the hedge fund's original thesis on it, though, is probably right. The retail stores and delivery of sale of games that are most games are actually downloaded now. When my son buys games, he downloads them on the internet. It doesn't go to a retail store to buy it. It's not necessary. So anyway, let's see. Someone says, in a recent episode, you mentioned shorting Moderna. How did that? There was a short-term trade, right? It was like over 2 weeks or so. How does that work out?
It's working out pretty well. Let's check what it is today, because that's a volatile stock. Can you call that up?
Yeah,
you can do it quicker than I can, since my computer skills are, let's say, marginal.
Let me see if I can. Well, it's trading for $147 at the moment. So it's up 0.5% today.
Well, yes, and I said, and what I did is I shorted a bunch of very close-in calls at 165 and at 160. And it's worked out very well. And it's still a great short because there's still a huge premium in these calls. Somebody expects that stock to get bought out. Might happen. I might get my, but over the next 2 weeks, unless Moderna, if it's 145, you said right now as we speak.
It's almost 147 actually.
Fine. So in my closest in calls, unless it goes up over $13 in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to capture a lot of premium. Like I sold those things for $10 a piece.
Wow.
So unless it goes up to 165 plus $10, 170, I still make money. It's a bubble.
Hard to see that happening.
Yeah, I wish I could find more examples of things like that.
Yeah,
There's a company that should go to zero, as far as I'm concerned. If there's any justice and light and in the world, it should go to zero for creating these things.
Yeah, well, and especially you hear about the CEO and co-founder basically been selling tens of millions of dollars worth of stock every week, or just from the very beginning. So they've been really cleaned up on it. And then actually the CEO of Moderna deleted his Twitter account. Because he was being trolled so much by other people. I think he just gave up. But
don't bother. Yeah, don't bother twittering these people. I mean, just look at but look, do I recommend people do it? If you have to ask the question, you shouldn't be doing it to start with, if you have to ask the question. And secondly, selling naked calls on a volatile stock is not something you should do unless you're in a position to, in fact, act like an insurance company or act like a casino, which takes a lot of capital.
Yep.
So it's been great for me, but do I recommend other people do it? And should you buy puts? Well, no, and not in my opinion, because the puts have huge time premium too. You're paying like the equivalent of 200% per year in order to hope that it goes down faster than time premium expires. So,
yeah. Not for the rookies, that's for sure.
No, for sure.
Okay, so someone says, sorry, asking about the situation in Canada. Oh, where is this one? Sorry, I lost. Okay. Let's see. I'm almost positive Doug answered this question at least a few times before, but given the recent declaration of martial law in Canada and the government's ability to seize bank assets without a warrant, this has put Sprott Inc. and PSLV investors in a precarious situation. And I guess he's saying that because these are Canadian companies. Does Doug have a reputable brokerage that he thinks is the cleanest dirty shirt in the hamper? I know he's mentioned routinely that foreign banks want nothing to do with American money because it entangles them in all these US banking regulations. But just, yeah, your thoughts on that?
If you're an American, I don't think you can find a Canadian brokerage firm or bank that will open an account for you, unless you're an American who can prove he's living in Canada legally, or you're an American that has at least 7 figures to make it worth their overcoming the regulatory hurdles. So it's an interesting academic question, but for almost everybody, it's academic.
Yeah. Okay. Doug, do you still have a U.S. residence? And is there any advantage of being in the U.S. compared to Uruguay?
Well, I still own a house in the U.S. because as nice as Uruguay is, during the winter, it gets cold and wet and chilly. It's not bad, but still, there are places in the U.S. that are mellower. And I feel on edge when I'm in the US because you could be trapped there, just the way Canadians found that they were trapped in Canada, and Australians and Kiwis found they were trapped there a number of times over the last couple of years. But listen, the U.S. is developed. You can get everything. It's convenient. Everything works well still. So yeah, I I still like being in the U.S. in the right part of the country.
Right. Yeah, and that, I mean, it's a lot easier to get things done in the U.S. than it is in Uruguay. That's for sure. And it's a if you know, especially if the the consumer economy there is amazing, and you realize that when you come to a place like here where it's much more closed economy and more difficult to do all those things. But um,
I find it's equally pleasant and much more pleasant in some ways here in South America, but
but different.
we're different.
Yeah. Okay, so if or when the U.S. empire collapses, what'll happen to the 5,000 nukes the U.S. has?
Well, that question was semi-answered when the Soviet Union collapsed, and there were stories floating around that apparently had real a real factual basis. Where I've said for years, look, if I was a Russian general, or maybe just a Russian master sergeant that actually physically moves the damn things around, which the general's not going to do. Yeah, and these things are pretty small now. Some of them, you know, you could sequester a few of them and realize that they're worth a lot of money to the right person. So what happens to them? I mean, how well organized during a chaotic situation are these governmental entities? I mean, not very. So I'm not worried about the US, but the fact is, uh, what's going to happen when, of course, the Israelis have a couple hundred of them? Eh, probably better controlled, but who else has them? The French have them. You know, what are their controls like? I mean, yeah, the Russians, they got the Kazakhs and the Ukrainians to give them all back. That was neat. Probably gave them all back, but who knows? I mean, these things are really dangerous. But
Right.
listen, the bigger danger is that you know any well-trained biochemist can develop his own versions of viruses and bacteria, especially using CRISPR, things like that. God knows where that could go.
Yeah.
So yeah, nuclear bombs floating around the world are a clear and present danger, as they like to say. But a high school biolab might be an even bigger one.
Well, and I'm not sure I don't really trust these nukes in the hands of a nation state either. I mean,
Oh,
they built them and
everybody,
used them.
everybody should watch Doctor Strangelove. That's a movie that should be on absolutely everybody's viewing list. I presume all of our watchers have watched Doctor Strangelove, but it's worth watching more than once.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Okay. Um, let's see. Someone else asking about shrinking population. So I'll skip that one. Um, Says most savvy investors know that they should have a certain percentage of your wealth in physical gold and silver, and that it's probably prudent to have a higher amount than a normal amount due to the global problems. Of course, I would never put it in the physical banking system, um, and the physical banking system vaults. So he wants to know if there's how you would suggest they do diligence on any of the private vaults that are out there for gold and silver storage.
Hmm. Gee, I don't know. Um, hmm. How do you do diligence on a very privacy-oriented business?
No, I mean like a vault, the storage facilities that are out there that store, gold and silver. How would you even determine whether or not, they're reliable and honest and
You know, this actually boils down to a cosmic question. If you find a private storage vault, let's say one that just has safe deposit boxes that you use with the little key, how do you know that the guys that are running the night shift don't decide that they figure out the proper way to do it and just empty everybody's boxes and hightail it out of there before the morning shift arrives. Well, is there an effective way of guarding against that? Gee, I'm not sure there is. I mean, look at that movie, Money Heist,
Yep.
that series, Money Heist, which was actually quite entertaining. Shows how you can rob a national bank. Forget about
Yeah.
a private storage facility. Forget about one where it's in Singapore, the Caymans, or Switzerland. You've never even physically seen your gold. This is further proof in my mind for the fact that we live in the matrix.
Well, I think, the other thing is that, like, and if you expect actual chaos in the world, like, which is, these are basically gold and silver is, in normal times, you might look at it as savings, and maybe chaotic times, it's chaos insurance. And, if keeping that in any facility that requires on normalcy, or at least norms, in order to make sure your goods are secure, I think that's a weird risk to take on right now. And I also know that there's some close friends of mine who, who had a literal ton of gold in a Swiss vault. And when all the COVID restrictions fell upon the world, and they were then trapped in a certain geographic location, that ton of gold was utterly inaccessible to them, utterly of no value suddenly to them, even though they've been prudent and thoughtful, and and their due diligence and everything up until that point. So, in chaos, I think having it by you makes most sense.
Yeah, it does. And look what happened to look what happened to the Jews that had a lot of money in Switzerland during World War II. A lot of them, their accounts just kind of disappeared when they couldn't prove it anymore. So now you have to fight with the bank about who you really are, and is that gold really yours? And yeah, there's real advantages to remote storage like that, but real disadvantages too. But on the other hand, if you're going to have a ton, I hate to refer to gold by the
I
ton.
don't know. I don't know what kind of ton they had either. I don't know.
Yeah, that's right. What kind of ton is it? And anyway, nobody buys or sells or mines or uses gold by the ton. So where this meme developed, it was with the IMF, of course, making gold seem like it's unownable when they talk about owning it by the ton. It's priced by the ounce. It's used by the ounce. It should be reported by the ounce, not by the ton. But anyway, that ton is probably about, 31,000 and some ounces.
Yeah.
That's a lot of gold. And then, of course, if you have it in your own possession, you've got to defend it, because it's well known that people will rob a corner liquor store for a couple $100 if word ever gets out that you've got a ton of gold, which they have no idea.
Well, and there was that famous case. That case here in Uruguay, remember, where this banking family, German banking family, had in his house in Uruguay, in the middle of nowhere in Uruguay, he had I don't know, many millions of dollars worth of gold, and he was robbed. Remember that? I think I shared that story with you.
Yeah, I do remember. I do remember what happened, or I do remember that happened. I don't remember if they ever recovered the gold or found out.
No, they haven't. They haven't yet. Not, at least as of a few months ago. No. But
yeah,
anyway, you paint a big target on your back if anyone knows you have it. That's for sure.
yeah. We live in the world's dangerous enough right now, and if things get chaotic in the years to come, anything could happen.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Next question. Doug, when is too much too much? When do the masses wake up and overturn the criminals in charge of the world, or do they lull the masses back to sleep and the world continues a few more years until the next crisis?
Well, of course, we talked for perhaps 15 minutes about peasant revolts throughout history. 15 minutes isn't much time to devote to peasant revolts, which is what we're talking about here, when the masses get fed up and pissed off enough. It almost never works. Historically, 95% of peasant revolts are quashed, and nobody hears any more about them. And powers that be don't write about them because they don't want to acknowledge that it could happen again. And so this time, what's going to happen? Well, I don't know. The odds, unfortunately, are against it. But even if they do win, and the peasants successfully overthrow the corrupt ruling order, it's likely to turn out like the French Revolution, which kind of started out as an urban peasants' revolt, if you would, and then it got worse and worse again. Mm-hmm. And look at the Russian Revolution, which was kind of a peasants' revolt. The wrong people got it, and you know, you thought Nicholas II was bad. Well, then you got Lenin, and then it got worse again when you got Stalin. So these things are dangerous and unpredictable. Look, we live on a prison planet full of, you know, crazy chimpanzees. So we ought to all be thankful for things being as calm and operational as they currently are at the moment.
Right. And I also think you should not wait or even think that, you know, you need a broad scale wake up of the population in order for you to, you know, for things to be okay in your world. Like, I mean, there are things that you can do. And if you, I used to think probably about 15 years ago, I was thinking, you know, if people really just knew about what I thought happened on 9/11, like people would not tolerate this stuff, you know, and I thought that would wake people up, and so I was obsessed with this idea of trying to wake people up to what I thought was the truth. And it doesn't do any good. Like, it doesn't make any difference. It doesn't, it's not even a worthwhile pursuit. Instead, you know, be awake and build, you know, build a life, and, you know, try and find freedom where you can.
You're absolutely right. That actually is the only answer. I mean, I can't help myself from trying to annoy the powers that be and chip away at them where I can. But that's for my personal amusement, not because I think it's going to change anything.
Yeah, trying to entertain yourself. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Doug, we talked about predictions at the beginning of this. Do you have a prediction for the stock market in 2022? Will we see all-time highs this year?
I hate to make predictions like that. All I can tell you is what I'm doing and have been doing, which in my case, I'm not buying puts. I'm just selling out of the money nearby calls that I expect to expire worthless, because I think the big trend is headed down. So yeah, I'm a bear, and it's possible. It seems for lots of reasons possible to me that we could have a collapse. Absolutely, for lots of different reasons. So I'm afraid that I'm a bear because the foundations of everything are so shaky. But Matt, you're frozen on my screen. What about me? I can't tell from where I am.